No one noticed the maid when she crossed the marble floor with a cleaning cart. That was the point. Grace Miller had spent years mastering the art of being invisible eyes down. Steps quiet, presence erased. In Alejandro Zanetti's world, invisible people survived. What no one knew was this: within 72 hours, that same woman would become the most dangerous person in the room. Alejandro Zanetti never made impulsive choices. He ruled with precision, silence, and fear. But on the night he needed a woman at his side for his brother's wedding, he didn't call a model or a politician's daughter. He walked into his kitchen and pointed at her. Grace froze. Not because she was afraid, but because she knew exactly what that choice would cost him. Because years ago, long before she wore a uniform and cleaned his floors, Grace had seen something she was never meant to survive. And the moment Alejandro chose her, he unknowingly triggered a countdown one that would force him to choose between his empire and the woman who could destroy it. The kitchen of the Zanetti estate was silent in the way only powerful places ever were quiet, not from peace, but from discipline. Marble counters reflected the cold overhead lights. Every surface gleamed. Every sound echoed too clearly. It was nearly midnight, and most of the staff had already retreated into the shadows where they belonged. Grace Miller was finishing her shift the way she always did, efficiently, quietly, invisibly. She held a crystal glass in her hand, polishing it with practiced movements. Eyes lowered, posture careful. In this house, looking too much was a mistake. Being noticed was a risk. Grace had survived by becoming part of the background, a moving shape no one bothered to remember. That was why the voice behind her felt unreal. Stop. The word was low, controlled, absolute. Grace froze. She didn't turn around immediately. Everyone in the house knew that voice. Alejandro Zanetti, the man who owned the walls, the silence, the fear woven into the air itself. The man whose meetings ran past midnight and whose decisions decided whether other men breathed tomorrow. Slowly, she turned. Alejandro stood in the doorway, still wearing the black suit from his meeting, jacket unbuttoned, sleeves rolled to his forearms. His hair was slightly disordered, his jaw tense, his expression unreadable. He looked like a man who hadn't slept and didn't intend to. His gaze didn't sweep the room. It didn't search. It stopped on her. For one suspended second, the world tilted. Grace's fingers tightened around the glass. Her heartbeat thudded once, hard, then steadied. She had done nothing wrong. She replayed the last hour in her mind, searching for a mistake. There was none. Alejandro stepped closer. "You," he said. The single word landed like a command rather than an address. "Yes," Sir Grace answered automatically, her voice softer than she felt. He studied her in silence, not the way men usually looked at women, not with hunger or curiosity, but with calculation. As if she were a piece on a board he had just noticed. "I need a woman to attend my brother's wedding with me," he said. Grace blinked. Once, twice. For a moment, she was certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Alejandro didn't repeat himself. He never did. "You will accompany me," he continued. "Tomorrow night." The glass slipped slightly in her grasp, clinking against the counter. The sound seemed too loud in the stillness. The kitchen felt smaller, the air thicker. In Alejandro Zanetti's world, women like Grace did not exist in public spaces. They cleaned, they served, they disappeared. They were not placed beside him under chandeliers and cameras and the eyes of people who mattered. Grace swallowed. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding." His eyes sharpened. "There hasn't..." A subtle shift rippled through the room. The security guard stationed beyond the doorway straightened, sensing a change in tone. Grace felt it too, that invisible pressure that came when Alejandro made a decision. "I don't need you to understand," he said calmly. "I need you to comply." Her throat tightened. "And if I refuse?" she asked, before fear could stop her. For the first time, something flickered across his face. Not anger. Interest. "You won't." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. Alejandro moved closer until only the counter separated them. Up close. He smelled faintly of leather and something sharper control. Perhaps power always had a scent. "You will stand at my side for the duration of the event," he said. "You will speak only when spoken to. You will not leave my presence unless I instruct you to. No one touches you. No one questions you. That is my responsibility." Grace stared at him, heart pounding. And after she asked, he said, "You return to being invisible." The words should have comforted her. Instead, they terrified her. Because Grace knew something Alejandro didn't. This was the twist that made her blood run cold. He hadn't chosen her at random. And yet, he had. She lowered her gaze, hiding the tremor in her hands. Why me? Alejandro's eyes lingered on her face for a fraction of a second too long. Because, he said, you are someone no one is watching. That sentence echoed in her chest. No one is watching you. Grace forced herself to nod. Yes, sir. The answer came easily. Too easily. Alejandro turned away as if the matter were settled. Someone will collect you in the morning. Be ready. He paused at the doorway. One more thing, he added without looking back. From this moment on, you do not speak to anyone about this. If someone approaches you, you come to me. If you feel unsafe, you come to me. If you are questioned by anyone, you come to me. Grace hesitated. And if you're not there, his voice lowered. Then you wait until I am. With that, he left. The kitchen lights hummed softly. The guards resumed their positions. The world returned to normal. Except it didn't. Grace stood frozen long after his footsteps faded. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished marble same uniform. Same tied-back hair, same carefully erased presence. But everything had changed. She slowly set the glass down, her fingers trembling now that no one was watching. Because years ago, before the uniform, before the silence, Grace Miller had been a witness. She had seen names traded like weapons. She had seen blood cleaned off concrete floors by men who smiled afterward. She had heard one name repeated again and again, spoken with fear and respect. Zanetti. She had survived by running, by hiding, by becoming exactly what Alejandro Zanetti believed her to be tonight: harmless. Forgettable, safe. And now, by pointing at her in his kitchen, he had unknowingly pulled her back into a world she had spent years escaping. Grace pressed her palm flat against the counter, steadying herself. He thought he had chosen the perfect shield. What he didn't know was that standing beside her would put him closer to the truth than he had ever been before. And truths like that had consequences. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel to enjoy many more heart-stirring stories every week. Morning arrived without ceremony. Grace was awakened before sunrise by a soft knock on the small door of the staff wing. Not urgent, not gentle, efficient. By the time she finished dressing, 2 black SUVs were already waiting beyond the iron gates, engines humming like restrained beasts. Ethan Blake stood beside the nearest vehicle, dark coat buttoned, expression unreadable. "You're on time," he said, checking his watch. "Good." Grace nodded and climbed into the back seat without asking where they were going. Experience had taught her that questions rarely changed outcomes. As the gates slid open and the estate disappeared behind them, the city emerged in pale gray layers. Glass towers, empty streets, a world just beginning to breathe. Only then did Ethan speak again. "You don't need to be nervous." That almost made her laugh. "I'm not," Grace replied quietly. He glanced at her in the mirror, clearly unconvinced. "The boss wants everything precise today. You follow instructions, you don't argue, and you don't volunteer information. If someone asks you something personal, I redirect them to him." Grace finished. Ethan's eyebrow lifted slightly. "Good. You learn fast." The SUV stopped in front of a private penthouse downtown. No signage, no visible cameras. Inside, the space was flooded with light, white and gold and impossibly clean. Grace felt the familiar tug of displacement, the sense of stepping into a world she was never meant to touch. A woman in her 40s approached with a warm, practiced smile, elegant, confident, dangerous in the way only women who had survived powerful men could be. "You must be Grace," she said. "I'm Elena." Grace shook her hand. "Careful, nice to meet you. Elena knows the rules," Ethan said. "She's here to help." Help was an interesting word. Grace was guided into a dressing room larger than her entire apartment. As assistants began working hair unbound, skin warmed with light touches. Elena studied her reflection in the mirror. "You don't look surprised," Elena observed. "I've learned not to show it," Grace replied. Elena smiled faintly. "That will serve you well tonight." As the hours passed, Grace watched a stranger take shape in the glass. Not someone beautiful in a loud way. Someone composed. Controlled. Someone people would look at twice because they couldn't immediately place her. That, Grace realized, was the real goal. Alejandro didn't want a distraction. He wanted a question mark. When the final adjustments were made, Elena stepped back. "He chose red," she said casually. Grace stiffened. "He chose yes. He wanted you seen, not admired. Seen." The words settled heavily. They returned to the estate just before evening. The atmosphere had changed. Security doubled. Voices low. Alejandro's presence felt everywhere, even before Grace saw him. He was waiting in the study. The moment Grace stepped inside, his gaze lifted and stayed. Something unreadable crossed his expression. Not surprise, not approval. Recognition, perhaps. As if she now matched an image he had already formed in his mind. "You'll do?" he said. Grace met his eyes. That was always the plan. Wasn't it? A pause. Brief, sharp. "You are here because you are unconnected," Alejandro replied. "No history. No alliances, no expectations." "That's not entirely true," Grace said before she could stop herself. Silence stretched. Alejandro leaned back slightly, studying her with renewed interest. "Explain." She chose her words carefully. "People notice patterns. They'll wonder why you chose someone so unremarkable." The corner of his mouth twitched. "They already are. And that's dangerous." She continued. "If they can't place me, they'll dig." Alejandro's eyes darkened. "Let them." The confidence in his voice was absolute. It should have reassured her. Instead, it confirmed her fear. "You don't know what they'll find," Grace said softly. For the first time, Alejandro stepped closer, not looming, not threatening, but deliberate. "If you know something," he said quietly, "now would be the time to speak." Grace held his gaze. Her heartbeat was steady. Her voice was not. "I know how to stay quiet," she said. "That's why I'm still alive." The words hung between them, sharp as glass. Alejandro straightened. "You will say nothing tonight," he decided. "You will follow my lead. If anyone approaches you, you smile and defer. You are under my protection." Grace hesitated. "And if your protection isn't enough?" His expression hardened. "It will be..." The cars arrived soon after. As Grace settled into the seat beside him, the city lights blurring past the windows, she felt the weight of his presence not oppressive, but intense, like standing too close to a fire. Alejandro's hand rested near hers, not touching. "Listen carefully," he said as the venue came into view. "Tonight is not about romance. It is about control. You are a symbol, nothing more." Grace nodded. But as the doors opened and cameras flashed like lightning, she understood the truth beneath his words. Symbols were never harmless. And by stepping into the light beside Alejandro Zanetti, Grace had crossed the final line between safety and exposure. The silence she had built her life upon was about to shatter. The venue glowed like a polished illusion, crystal chandeliers spilling light onto marble floors, string music floating just above the murmur of wealth and power. Names moved through the room like currency, traded in smiles and half-bows. Grace felt it immediately, the weight of attention without understanding. Eyes lingering not because they recognized her, but because they couldn't. Alejandro walked at her side with measured ease, one hand resting lightly at the small of her back, the contact precise and intentional, not intimate, strategic. It told the room everything it needed to know. She was not available for interpretation. Grace breathed in slowly, matching his pace. She had learned long ago that panic showed itself in the smallest ways in hurried steps, unfocused eyes, tension in the jaw. She gave none of that away. "Don't look around," Alejandro murmured, barely moving his lips. "Look at me." She did. Up close, the mask he wore for the world was flawless, calm, untouchable. Yet something beneath it shifted when he met her gaze, an alertness sharpened by the awareness that this night was not unfolding exactly as planned. "You're doing well," he said. "So are you," Grace replied softly. A flicker of surprise crossed his eyes before it disappeared. "This isn't a performance. Everything here is," she said. They stopped near the center of the room. Conversations bent subtly in their direction. Grace felt the pressure build, invisible and insistent. Alejandro's presence shielded her from most of it, but not all. Curiosity slipped through defenses, no matter how high they were built. A woman approached elegant, smiling too brightly. "Alejandro," she greeted, eyes already measuring Grace. "You've been keeping secrets." Alejandro's expression didn't change. "This isn't one of them." Grace inclined her head politely, saying nothing. The woman laughed lightly. "Of course, forgive me." "Forgive? I don't believe we've met." "You haven't," Alejandro replied. "And you won't." The dismissal was clean. Final. The woman retreated, curiosity unresolved. Grace exhaled only after she was gone. "You're very good at that." "At control?" Alejandro asked. "At ending conversations before they begin?" He studied her for a moment. "You noticed?" "I notice things." Grace said, "It's how I survive." The orchestra shifted, the tempo softening. Couples moved toward the dance floor as if summoned. Alejandro extended his hand without ceremony. "Dance with me?" Grace hesitated. "I don't know how. You'll learn in seconds." There was no arrogance in his voice, just certainty. She placed her hand in his. His grip was steady, guiding rather than claiming. As they moved, the room blurred into motion and sound, faces becoming indistinct shapes. Alejandro led with minimal effort, his body communicating what words didn't need to. "Relax," he said quietly. "They're watching me, not you." Grace almost smiled. "That's not true." He glanced down at her. "No, they're wondering why someone like you chose someone like me." For a fraction of a second, his steps faltered. "That's dangerous thinking," he said. "It's accurate," she replied. They continued in silence, the music carrying them through measured turns. Grace felt the tension ease slightly, not because the danger had passed, but because it had clarified. The threat was no longer abstract. It had a shape. "You said tonight was about control," she said. "But control only works when everyone understands the rules." "And do you?" Alejandro asked. She met his gaze. "Not all of them." His jaw tightened. "Then you shouldn't test them." Grace leaned closer, her voice low. "If they start testing you first, it won't matter whether I do." He stopped them at the edge of the dance floor, the music continuing around them. For the first time since she had met him, Alejandro looked unsettled. "What do you know?" he asked. Grace held his gaze, weighing the moment. The truth pressed against her ribs, heavy and insistent. But tonight was not the time to release it, not fully. "I know that someone here is counting how long you keep me beside you," she said. "And I know that if you let go too soon, they'll assume you made a mistake." His eyes darkened. "Who?" "Not yet," she said. "But soon." A voice cut through the moment. "Well," it drawled smoothly. "This is unexpected." Grace didn't need to turn to know who it was. The air changed. Confidence edged with cruelty had a distinct presence. Alejandro faced the man with controlled stillness. "Tyler." Tyler Hayes smiled, his gaze flicking briefly to Grace before returning to Alejandro. "You've been busy," he said. "I didn't realize surprises were your style." "They aren't," Alejandro replied. "This isn't one," Tyler chuckled. "That's a shame, because I find her very interesting." Grace felt Alejandro's hand tighten fractionally at her waist. "Careful," Alejandro warned. "You're crossing a line." Tyler's eyes glittered. "Am I?" Or did she cross it first? Grace lifted her chin. "If you have something to say," she told Tyler calmly, "say it to him." The smile slipped from Tyler's face, replaced by something colder. He leaned in just enough for her to hear. "Oh, I will," he said softly. "Soon." He straightened and walked away, leaving behind a silence sharper than before. Grace's pulse quickened, but her voice remained steady. "That's him," she said. Alejandro didn't ask who. He already knew. The night pressed in around them, beautiful and dangerous, every light casting deeper shadows. And as Alejandro led Grace back into the flow of the crowd, one truth became undeniable whatever game had begun tonight. It was no longer his alone to control. The moment Tyler Hayes disappeared into the crowd, the temperature of the room seemed to drop. Laughter resumed. Music swelled, glasses clinked, but the illusion of ease had cracked, and Grace felt it in the subtle tightening of Alejandro's posture beside her. "You don't move without me," he said quietly, his tone no longer merely protective but controlled, sharpened by intent. "I wasn't planning to," Grace replied. They walked toward a quieter corner near the terrace doors, where the lights softened and conversations thinned. Alejandro positioned himself so that his back shielded her from the room, his presence a silent barrier. Grace noticed the shift immediately. This was no longer a performance for onlookers. This was strategy. "You recognized him before I said his name," Alejandro said. That wasn't instinct. Grace looked past him at the city lights glittering beyond the glass. Instinct keeps you alive. Recognition keeps you breathing. He watched her carefully. "You've seen him before." "Yes." "When?" She hesitated, then chose honesty partial, measured. "Years ago. In a place where people didn't ask questions." Alejandro's jaw tightened. "And you survived." "I wasn't supposed to." The words settled between them, heavy with implications neither of them named. Alejandro studied her as if recalibrating, reassessing every assumption he had made. "Tyler doesn't fixate on nothing," he said finally. "If he's noticed you, It's because you matter. Grace met his gaze. That's what worries me. A server approached, offering champagne. Alejandro declined without looking away from her. The room felt distant now, reduced to background noise. What exactly do you think Tyler wants? Alejandro asked. Grace exhaled slowly. Control, leverage, insurance. And you, he pressed. She looked at him then. Really looked at the man who commanded fear with silence, who had built an empire on precision and distance. I think he wants to see how much you're willing to lose. Alejandro's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. He won't get that chance. He always does, Grace said softly. Before he could respond, a ripple moved through the room. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Tyler was approaching again. This time, he didn't stop at a polite distance. He stepped directly into Alejandro's space, his smile thin, his eyes sharp. Forgive the interruption, Tyler said smoothly, but curiosity is a dangerous thing when ignored. Alejandro's voice was cold. You've said enough for one evening. Have I? Tyler's gaze slid to Grace, lingering just long enough to be intentional. She's quieter than I expected. Grace didn't flinch. People tend to underestimate silence. Tyler laughed softly. You always did. The words struck like a blade. Alejandro's attention snapped to Grace. Always Tyler raised his glass. Ah, so he doesn't know. Grace's pulse surged, but she refused to look away. This isn't the place. Tyler leaned closer, his voice low enough that only they could hear. You disappeared. I wondered how long it would take before you resurfaced. I just didn't expect you to choose him. Alejandro's expression hardened. You're done, he said. Tyler straightened, unfazed. I disagree, because now we have a shared interest. He smiled at Grace again, this time without humor. You see, Alejandro, some secrets don't stay buried. They wait. Security shifted subtly around them, responding to a signal Alejandro hadn't visibly given. Tyler took a step back. Enjoy the rest of your evening, he said lightly. We'll talk soon. And then he was gone, swallowed by the crowd once more. Grace's breath came shallow. Alejandro turned to her, his gaze sharp, demanding. You know him, he said. Yes. How? She closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was there. You were not. Silence stretched. The distance between them felt suddenly fragile. You should have told me, Alejandro said. And then what? Grace asked. You would have erased me to protect yourself. The truth landed hard. Alejandro didn't deny it. The realization cut deeper than she expected. Grace felt the ache of it settle in her chest. Not heartbreak, but clarity. I stayed invisible because it was the only way to live. She continued. Until tonight. Alejandro studied her, the mask he wore for the world thinning. You put yourself beside me knowing this would happen. Yes. Why? Grace's voice was steady. Because he's not afraid of you. He's afraid of what you don't know. A murmur rose near the entrance. Alejandro's phone vibrated in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, then back at Grace. We're leaving, he said. Now. Now. They moved quickly, the shift drawing attention despite their efforts. As they passed through the doors and into the night air, Grace felt the weight lift slightly, replaced by a different tension, one sharper, more personal. Inside the car, silence pressed in. Alejandro broke it first. You are no longer a symbol, he said quietly. You are a liability. Grace met his gaze. And you're still keeping me? For now. She nodded. Then the game has changed? Yes, he agreed. And I intend to win it. But as the city lights streaked past, both of them understood the unspoken truth. This was no longer a game played on his terms alone. The car cut through the city in silence. The windows darkened. The world outside reduced to streaks of light and shadow. Grace sat upright in the back seat, hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture composed despite the storm moving through her chest. Alejandro sat beside her, still, unreadable, his presence filling the space without a word. When the gates of the Zanetti estate closed behind them, the illusion of safety returned, but it felt thinner now, stretched too tight. Alejandro didn't take her back to the staff wing. Instead, he led her into a private study on the east side of the house, a room few were ever allowed to enter. The door closed behind them with a muted click. No guards, no witnesses. You will tell me everything, he said calmly. Grace didn't pretend to misunderstand. She moved toward the chair opposite his desk, but didn't sit. Remaining on her feet felt important, an unspoken line she wasn't ready to cross. "What I know isn't clean," she said. "Once you hear it, you won't be able to forget it." Alejandro leaned back slightly, folding his hands. "I don't forget things. That's exactly the problem." She took a breath, steadying herself. The room smelled faintly of old books and smoke, a place built for decisions that carried consequences. "Years ago," Grace began, "I worked at a place that didn't officially exist. No name on the door, no records. People went in with secrets and came out lighter." Alejandro's eyes sharpened. "A front." "Yes." "For transactions that required silence?" She paused. "That's where I saw Tyler Hayes." And Alejandro pressed, "And I saw him sell information that didn't belong to him." Grace said, "Names, routes, dates. One of them was yours." The air seemed to shift. Alejandro remained still, but Grace felt the weight of his attention settle fully on her. "Continue." "I wasn't supposed to hear it," she said. "But I did. And when the deal went wrong, the people who knew too much didn't walk out. You did." Alejandro said, "I ran," Grace replied. "I changed my name. I learned how to disappear. And eventually, I ended up here." A quiet realization dawned in his gaze. "You didn't choose this house by chance." "No," she admitted. "I chose it because no one looks for ghosts inside fortresses." Alejandro stood, moving around the desk slowly, deliberately. He stopped a short distance from her, not invading her space, but close enough that she could feel the heat of him. "You understood the risk of staying," he said, "of being seen?" "Yes, and yet you stayed anyway." Grace met his eyes. "Because I believed you were different." The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Alejandro's expression didn't soften. "Belief is a liability. So is ignorance," she countered. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Alejandro exhaled slowly, a controlled release of tension. "Tyler thinks you are leverage," he said, "something he can use to force my hand." "He's wrong," Grace said. "I'm not leverage. I'm proof." "Of what?" "That his power isn't absolute," she said, "and neither is yours." The admission cost her something. She felt it in the tightness of her chest, the awareness that she had crossed another line. Alejandro studied her, searching for weakness. He found none. "You could leave," he said suddenly. "Tonight. I could arrange it." Grace shook her head. "That would confirm everything he suspects. And staying confirms something else." Alejandro replied, "That I value you." She didn't deny it. "You do." Silence pressed in again, heavier than before. Alejandro turned away, pacing once, then stopping at the window. Outside, the estate lay quiet, guarded, ordered. Inside, something had begun to fracture. "I built my world on predictability," he said quietly. "Tyler thrives on chaos. He'll push until something breaks." Grace stepped closer, not touching, but near enough to be felt. "Then don't let it be me." His gaze flicked to her. "You're already part of it? Then use me," she said softly. "Not as bait, as truth." Alejandro turned fully to face her. "You're asking me to expose myself. I'm asking you to stop pretending you're untouchable," Grace replied. "Because Tyler already knows you're not." Another pause. Longer this time. Finally, Alejandro nodded once. "You will remain under my protection," he said. "But from this point forward, you do nothing without my knowledge." Grace met his gaze. "Agreed. And if Tyler makes his move, then I'll tell you what he's really after," she said. "Because it's not me." A muscle in Alejandro's jaw tightened. "Then what is it?" Grace hesitated, then spoke the truth she had been holding back. "He wants you to choose," she said. "And once you do, he'll show the world why it was the wrong one." The realization settled like a shadow across the room. Alejandro straightened, his decision already forming. "Then we'll make sure he never gets the chance." As Grace turned to leave, she paused at the door. "Alejandro, yes, this isn't about revenge," she said. "It's about survival." His reply was quiet, precise. "In my world, those are the same thing." The door closed behind her, leaving him alone with the knowledge she had brought and the price it would demand. The following days passed in calculated silence. Grace remained within the estate, no longer confined to the staff wing, yet not entirely free. Her movements were subtlety adjusted, never announced as restrictions, never framed as protection, but unmistakable in effect. Alejandro had reshaped the perimeter around her, and everyone knew it. He did not speak to her often. When he did, it was never accidental. Their conversations were brief, precise, and loaded with things neither of them said aloud. Grace felt the shift between them clearly. She was no longer an unknown variable, but a known risk. And in Alejandro Zanetti's world, risks were either neutralized or weaponized. Tyler Hayes chose the third day to break the silence. The message came through a secure channel Alejandro hadn't used in years. No threats, no insults, just a location and a time, followed by 6 words. You should hear this in person. Alejandro read it once, then deleted it. He already knew what Tyler wanted. The question was not whether he would attend, but whether he would bring Grace into the room, where decisions stopped being reversible. He found her in the conservatory that evening, standing beside the tall windows, watching rain streak down the glass. She didn't turn when he entered. He reached out. Alejandro said. Grace closed her eyes briefly. I expected that. He wants a meeting. Yes, you'll stay here, he continued. She turned then, meeting his gaze calmly. No. Alejandro studied her. This isn't a negotiation. It is, Grace replied, because I'm the subject. A pause. Then, you're the leverage. I'm the context, she corrected. There's a difference. He stepped closer, his voice low. Tyler doesn't meet without conditions. And neither do you, Grace said. That's why he asked. Silence stretched between them, tense but controlled. Finally, Alejandro nodded once. You don't speak unless I tell you to. I won't, Grace said, unless I have to. The meeting took place the next night in a private lounge above the river, glass walls offering a view of the city's arteries glowing beneath them. Neutral ground, carefully chosen. Ethan and 2 others remained outside. Inside, only 3 chairs waited. Tyler was already there, relaxed, as if the room belonged to him. Alejandro entered first. Grace followed. Tyler's smile sharpened when he saw her. You brought her, he said. That saves time. Alejandro took the seat opposite him. Speak. Tyler leaned back. Straight to business. I respect that. His gaze flicked to Grace. You look well. Grace said nothing. I'll be brief. Tyler continued. You have something I want. Alejandro's expression didn't change. You don't want her? You want a reaction. Tyler chuckled. Always so perceptive. Fine. He leaned forward slightly. Here's my offer. You step aside. Let me handle what needs to be handled. In return, everything stays quiet. Your empire remains intact. Grace felt the weight of Alejandro's stillness beside her. And if I refuse, Alejandro asked. Tyler's smile thinned. Then I talk. To whom Alejandro pressed. Everyone, Tyler replied lightly. Authorities, rivals, people who love a good scandal. His eyes gleamed, starting with how Grace survived something she was never meant to witness. Grace inhaled slowly. Alejandro's voice dropped. You threaten her. No, Tyler corrected. I explain her. Silence fell, heavy and deliberate. And her Alejandro asked, what happens to her? Tyler's gaze turned cold. She loses everything first. That was the moment Grace spoke. No, she said quietly. Both men turned toward her. You don't get to narrate my story, she continued, her voice steady. You don't get to decide what I lose. Tyler laughed softly, still stubborn. That will cost you. Grace met his gaze. You already tried that. Alejandro's hand shifted closer to hers, not touching, but present. Tyler leaned back again. Think carefully. Alejandro, you built your world to survive storms. Don't let one woman become the crack. Alejandro stood. The movement was slow, controlled, final. You misunderstand, he said. She isn't the crack. She's the line. Tyler's expression hardened. Then you're choosing chaos. I'm choosing responsibility, Alejandro replied. Something you never learned. The meeting ended without violence, without raised voices, without resolution. That was the most dangerous outcome of all. As they left, Grace felt the tremor beneath her calm. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the city slick and reflective. In the car, silence pressed in. You didn't have to speak, Alejandro said eventually. I did, Grace replied. Because that offer wasn't for you. He glanced at her. It was... No, she said. It was to see if you'd let him erase me. Alejandro's jaw tightened. I won't. Grace looked out the window, watching the city blur past. Then he'll escalate. Yes, Alejandro agreed. And when he does, this ends. She turned to him. Not cleanly. No, he said, but decisively. The words settled between them, heavy with inevitability. Whatever balance had existed before was gone. From this moment on, there would be consequences. The estate settled into an uneasy quiet after the meeting, the kind that followed decisions no one could undo. Guards rotated more frequently. Lights stayed on longer. Even the walls seemed to listen. Grace felt it in the air. The tension had sharpened. No longer waiting, but preparing. Alejandro did not confine her. That, more than any locked door, told her how serious the situation had become. She found him late that night in the war room beneath the house, a place that existed beyond the reach of cameras and polite illusions. Maps glowed across digital screens. Names and routes shifted with silent urgency. Ethan stood near the far wall, listening without interrupting. Grace paused at the threshold. You're setting a trap. Alejandro didn't look up. I'm ending a problem. There's a difference, she said. He turned then, studying her with a calm that felt heavier than anger. You want this to end without blood. I want it to end without lies, Grace replied. They're what Tyler survives on. Alejandro dismissed Ethan with a glance. When the room was empty, he lowered his voice. You shouldn't be here. And yet you let me stay, Grace said. Yes, he admitted, because if I send you away now, Tyler wins without lifting a finger. Grace stepped closer, her presence grounding and dangerous at once. Then stop thinking like a king, she said. Think like a man who's about to lose something he didn't know he needed. Alejandro's expression shifted barely. You assume too much. I assume you're tired, she said softly. Tired of calculating losses instead of choosing what matters? Silence stretched, fragile and intimate. Outside the reinforced walls, the storm gathered, thunder murmuring its intent. You could leave tonight, Alejandro said. No one would know where you went. I can make that happen. Grace shook her head. And prove everything he believes. He stepped closer, their distance narrowing to something unguarded. This isn't your war. It became mine when he said my name. She replied. And when you didn't let go? Alejandro's gaze searched her face, as if looking for hesitation. He found none. You understand what standing beside me costs, he said. I understand what running costs. Grace answered. The truth settled between them, heavy and undeniable. Alejandro exhaled slowly. Then listen carefully. Tomorrow, Tyler will make his move. He thinks I'll choose between exposure and surrender. And you won't, Grace said. No, Alejandro agreed. I'll give him a third option. She met his eyes. Which is revelation, he said. Controlled? Irrefutable. Grace nodded. Then you'll need me? Yes, he admitted, but not as bait. She studied him for a moment, then smiled faintly. That might be the first time someone said that. Alejandro's hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed against her knuckles. The contact was brief, restrained, but it sent a quiet current through the space between them. This ends tomorrow, he said. Grace held his gaze. Whatever happens, don't rewrite what you choose tonight. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? Don't tell yourself later that you had no choice. She said. You do. The storm broke just after midnight. Rain lashed the estate, thunder cracking the sky open. Grace lay awake in a guest room overlooking the grounds, listening to the world fracture outside. Sleep refused to come. She rose quietly and made her way to the balcony. The rain soaked her hair, cold and grounding. For a moment, she felt small again, the ghost she had been before tonight. You should be inside, Alejandro's voice said behind her. She turned. He stood in the doorway, coat draped over his shoulders, eyes reflecting the storm. So should you, she replied. They stood together in silence, rain blurring the line between them and the night. Do you regret choosing me? Grace asked quietly. Alejandro didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was low and certain. No. The simplicity of the word held more weight than any declaration. I've built my life on control, he continued. You're the first thing I didn't anticipate. Grace smiled faintly. I've built mine on hiding. You're the first place that feels visible. Thunder rolled overhead. Closer now. Alejandro reached for her hand, this time without hesitation. Stay with me tomorrow, he said. No matter what happens, I will. Grace replied. But not because you asked. His gaze softened. Because you choose to. Yes. The storm roared around them, rain and darkness folding the world into something raw and inevitable. And as they stood there, hands entwined, both understood the truth waiting beyond dawn. By this time tomorrow, everything would change. Dawn arrived without color. The sky washed thin and pale as if the storm had drained it of certainty. The city woke cautiously, unaware that decisions made before sunrise would ripple through its shadows by nightfall. Grace felt the shift the moment she opened her eyes, an unspoken understanding that there would be no return to quiet after today. The docks lay at the edge of the river, abandoned enough to be forgotten, exposed enough to be dangerous. Alejandro chose the location for its honesty. Nothing hid well there. Not lies, not fear. 3 SUVs moved through the fog in tight formation. Grace sat in the center vehicle, flanked by Alejandro and Ethan. No one spoke. The silence wasn't tense, it was resolved. Plans had already been made. Words would only dilute them. As the vehicle stopped, Alejandro turned to Grace. "You stay behind me, no matter what." She nodded. "I know." But when he reached for her hand, his grip was different from before, not commanding, anchoring. The warehouse loomed ahead, a low concrete structure with rusted doors and broken windows staring blindly at the river. 2 figures stood near the entrance, silhouettes against the dim morning light. "Armed," Ethan murmured. "Of course," Alejandro replied calmly. He stepped out first, scanning the shadows with practiced precision. Grace followed, her heartbeat steady despite the tremor in her legs. Fear was present, but it no longer ruled her. She had crossed that threshold already. The warehouse door creaked open. Tyler Hayes emerged slowly, his smile easy, confident, almost amused. "You came," he said. "I was beginning to think you'd send someone else." Alejandro didn't answer. He positioned himself slightly in front of Grace, a silent declaration. Tyler's gaze slid past him. "And you brought her. Interesting choice. Say another word about her," Alejandro warned, "and this ends differently." Tyler chuckled. "You see, that's what fascinates me. You never used to threaten. You calculated." Grace stepped closer, her voice calm. "You calculated wrong." Tyler's eyes flicked to her. Sharp. "Did I—" He snapped his fingers. From the shadows inside the warehouse, screens flickered on footage paused mid-frame, documents layered across projections. Names, dates, transactions, some recent, some old. Grace felt Alejandro tense. "I prepared," Tyler said lightly. "In case you said no, you always do," Alejandro replied. "Insurance is survival," Tyler countered. "Something you taught me." Grace looked at the screens, recognizing pieces of her past threaded through them. The truth Tyler had hoarded, waiting for leverage, waiting for her. "You don't control this anymore," she said. Tyler smiled. "I control timing, and timing is everything." Alejandro raised his hand slightly. The guards moved, weapons ready but lowered. "You wanted a choice," he said. "Here it is." Tyler's grin widened. "I'm listening." Alejandro's voice carried across the empty dock, calm and unwavering. "You release everything you have, every copy, every backup. You walk away. And if I don't," Tyler asked. Alejandro met his gaze. "Then what you're about to see goes public first." He nodded once. Ethan pressed a button. The screens shifted. New footage filled the warehouse Tyler, recorded from multiple angles, negotiating with men who were no longer alive, selling information that had led to bloodshed, names of buyers, accounts, routes, evidence gathered carefully, patiently. Tyler's smile faltered. "You think I didn't prepare?" Alejandro said. "You think I let you circle my world for years without watching back?" Tyler's expression hardened. "You'd destroy us both." "No," Alejandro replied. "I'd end you." Silence fell heavy. Grace watched Tyler's confidence fracture, just slightly. "Enough. This isn't about me," Grace said quietly. "It never was. You used my survival as a threat because it reminded you that you failed." Tyler turned on her. "You should have stayed invisible." She met his gaze steadily. "You should have let me." For a moment, it seemed the world held its breath. Then Tyler laughed short, sharp, hollow. "You win this round," he said. "But don't mistake that for mercy." Alejandro didn't respond. He didn't need to. Tyler stepped back, signaling his men to stand down. The tension eased, but the danger did not vanish. It never truly did. As Tyler disappeared into the fog, Grace exhaled, her knees weakening. Alejandro's hand tightened at her back, steadying her. "It's not over," she said. "No," Alejandro agreed. But it's begun to end. They returned to the car as the sun finally broke through the clouds, casting pale light across the river. Grace leaned back against the seat, exhaustion settling deep into her bones. Alejandro turned to her, his gaze unreadable. You were brave. She looked at him, searching his face. You were honest. That, she knew, had cost him more. The docks faded behind them as the city reclaimed its rhythm. But something fundamental had shifted. The line Alejandro had drawn was now visible to the world, and once seen, it could never be erased. The city did not explode the way Grace had imagined. There were no sirens chasing headlines, no sudden raids splashed across morning news. Instead, the fallout arrived quietly, in subtle shifts that only people like Alejandro Zanetti noticed: the delayed phone calls, the meetings that were politely postponed, the allies who suddenly remembered other obligations. Power rarely collapsed loudly. It withdrew. Grace felt it in the estate first. The guards changed, rotations adjusted. Some familiar faces vanished without explanation. The house itself seemed to exhale, shedding a skin it no longer needed. Alejandro was everywhere and nowhere at once, handling negotiations, closing doors, severing ties that had once been unthinkable. He did not hide any of it from her. That, more than the danger, unsettled Grace. They spoke late into the nights now, not in dramatic confrontations, but in quiet exchanges that carried weight, sometimes in the study, sometimes on the terrace, overlooking the city that continued to function as if nothing had changed. You're dismantling parts of your empire, Grace said one evening, watching him review reports with ruthless efficiency. I'm correcting it, Alejandro replied. There's a difference. She studied his face. He looked tired, but lighter somehow, like a man who had stopped carrying a lie he no longer believed in. You could have buried everything, she said. You had the leverage. Yes, he agreed, and I would have lost more than I gained. Grace nodded. She understood that now. Tyler had wanted to force a choice that would rot slowly from the inside. Alejandro had chosen to cut cleanly instead. The consequences were not gentle. A week later, Tyler Hayes disappeared from the board entirely. No public scandal, no dramatic arrest, just a quiet erasure. His name stopped circulating. His influence dissolved as if it had never existed. But victory came with its own cost. Alejandro's world was smaller now, safer in some ways, more dangerous in others. He had drawn a line, and lines invited challenge. Grace sensed the moment he began to prepare for her departure. It was in the way he paused before entering a room she was in, as if giving her space she hadn't asked for. In the way he no longer issued instructions about her movements. In the way he began speaking of after in neutral terms. You'll be able to leave soon, he said one morning over coffee. Your name is clean. Your records are sealed. Grace stirred her cup slowly. And you, I'll remain, he said simply. She looked up. That's it. Alejandro met her gaze steadily. I won't keep you. The words should have comforted her. Instead, they settled heavy in her chest. That night, Grace walked the estate alone, retracing paths she had once taken as a ghost. The corridors felt different now, less oppressive, less silent. She realized with a quiet shock that she was no longer hiding. She found Alejandro in the library just past midnight, standing by the window, the city lights reflected faintly in the glass. You're letting me go, she said. Yes, because it's safer, because it's right, he replied. Grace stepped closer. For whom? For you, Alejandro said. And for me? She searched his face. Do you believe that he didn't answer immediately? When he did, his voice was low. I believe that wanting you here is not enough of a reason to make you stay. The honesty of it stole her breath. Grace moved until they stood only inches apart. And if I choose to stay, Alejandro's eyes darkened, then it has to be your choice. Completely. She nodded slowly. Not protection, not obligation, not fear, he added. Silence stretched between them, fragile and intimate. You know, Grace said softly, I spent years surviving by disappearing. I thought safety meant not being seen. And now Alejandro asked. And now I know it means being able to leave, she said, and not wanting to. Something shifted in his expression, something unguarded. The days that followed were strange and gentle. Grace packed and unpacked the same suitcase twice. Alejandro continued restructuring his world, no longer pretending it was untouched by her presence. On the final evening before her supposed departure, the estate was quiet. No guards hovered nearby. No meetings waited. They shared dinner in the kitchen where everything had begun. This is where you chose me, Grace said. Yes, and this is where I stopped being invisible. Alejandro nodded. You were never invisible to me. I just didn't know what I was seeing. Grace reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. This time, he did not pull away. Whatever tomorrow held, the storm had passed. What remained was choice. And sometimes, that was the most dangerous and hopeful thing of all. Morning arrived softly, as if the world itself had learned restraint. Sunlight slipped through the tall kitchen windows, pale and unhurried, touching the marble counters where everything had begun. Grace stood alone for a moment, listening to the quiet, not the tense silence she had once feared, but something open, waiting. Her suitcase rested by the door. It had been packed the night before with careful precision. Clothes folded, documents secured, a life prepared for departure. Grace had gone to sleep believing she would leave at dawn, believing that choosing herself meant walking away. But standing there now, she realized something had changed. She wasn't running anymore. Footsteps sounded behind her. Alejandro entered the kitchen without ceremony, sleeves rolled up, his presence no longer commanding the room by force, but by familiarity. He stopped when he saw the suitcase. "You're ready," he said. Grace nodded. "Yes." A pause followed. Not heavy, not desperate, just honest. "I arranged transportation," Alejandro continued. "You'll have security until you reach the city limits. After that, you won't be followed." She turned to face him. "You kept your word. I always do." Grace studied his face, searching for regret, for hesitation, for the slightest attempt to persuade her otherwise. There was none, only acceptance. That, she realized, was the truest proof of change. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same distance that had once separated a king from a servant. Now it felt different. Equal? "You know," Grace said quietly, "if you had asked me to stay, I might have wondered later if I really chose it." Alejandro met her gaze. "And if I had asked, I would never know whether you stayed for me or because you felt you owed me?" She smiled faintly. "You've learned something. So have you," he replied. The coffee cooled between them as time stretched gently, unafraid of itself. Outside, the estate was calm, no longer braced for attack, no longer hiding its fractures. Grace stood and walked to the door. She rested her hand on the handle. Alejandro remained seated. This was the moment. She inhaled, then turned back to him. "If I leave now," she said, "I'll be safe." "Yes." "And if I stay," Alejandro didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was steady. "Then the world you stand in will never be simple." Grace nodded. It never was. She walked back to the table and stopped in front of him. Slowly, deliberately. She reached for the suitcase and pushed it aside away from the door. "I'm not staying because I'm afraid," she said, "and not because I need protection." Alejandro rose to his feet, his expression unreadable but intent. "I'm staying," Grace continued, "because I know I can leave. And because, for the first time in my life, I don't want to." Silence wrapped around them, warm and fragile. Alejandro didn't touch her right away. He didn't speak. He simply looked at her as if committing the moment to memory. "Then stay," he said softly. "Not as something I chose, as someone who chose me back." Grace smiled fully this time. The days that followed were not perfect. They were honest. Grace no longer wore a uniform. She moved freely through the house, through meetings, through a world that watched her now with curiosity rather than dismissal. Alejandro did not introduce her with titles. He did not claim her. He stood beside her, and that was enough. They learned each other in quiet ways, late conversations, shared silences, the unspoken understanding that love, when it arrived, did not need grand declarations to be real. One evening, as the city lights flickered on beyond the terrace, Grace leaned against the railing, watching the horizon. "You know," she said, "I used to think being invisible was safety. And now," Alejandro asked, standing beside her, "and now I think safety is being seen and still being allowed to choose." He nodded. "Then you've changed us both." Grace turned to him. "No. You changed when you let me go." He met her gaze, something rare and unguarded in his eyes. "And you changed when you stayed." They stood there as night settled gently over the city, no longer bracing for storms, no longer waiting for threats to return. The empire Alejandro Zanetti had built would continue to evolve. Power would always demand vigilance, but at its center now was something quieter, stronger, and far more dangerous to those who underestimated it. A woman who had once been invisible, and a man who had finally learned that love was not possession, but choice. Together, they turned back toward the light.